Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent, Holland, and welcome one and all. Settle in your most comfy chair, get the coffee going, get the tea going, or a beverage of choice going. I'm in Montreal right now for a change, and it is nasty outside. But apparently, where Larry is, everything is copacetic, and it's springtime, and there's people running around in bathing suits, and just a lovely time. Larry Hancock is our guest tonight. Larry Hancock brings his formal training in history and cultural anthropology to his research and writing on Cold War history and national security subjects. He is a graduate of the University of New Mexico. He earned his BA with honors, majoring in history, cultural anthropology, and education. Larry also served. Very important, folks, because this means a lot to every one of us in the United States Air Force. And again, I'm going to thank him for his service, keeping us all safe. Larry is a board member of the Mary Farrell Foundation, which is a major online interactive history archive. Now, he's got a dozen books in print. Some of his works include Shadow Warfare, In Denial, Surprise Attack, Someone Would Have Talked, Killing King, Tipping Point, The Conspiracy That Murdered President Kennedy. Tonight, we're going to talk about his new book that's raised many eyebrows in the community, by the way, The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. It's groundbreaking, folks, as all his research is. You got to get this book. Larry, you also have a co-author to this book. Can you tell us a little bit about him, David Bolin?
Yeah, David is more of a document geek than I am. I think that's the real thing to take from David. David is obsessive about his research. David finds things that I would never have found. He remembers things that I no longer am able to remember, like the name of hundreds of CIA officers and anti-Castro figures. And uh, David's the kind of person, if you can appreciate this, who actually has developed an organization chart of JM Wave, the CIA operations station in Miami. Now that's the kind of person David is. He's a history buff, but he is really a document researcher. He's very proficient in that sort of thing, and he brought a great deal of that. We could not have done this work without David, without a doubt. I could not, and neither of us could have done the work without the documents that have become available on the
Mm,
last decade, the interviews that have become available, but it was David who mustered them and brought them to the party. And it also we have to note that it was Rex Bradford of
Mary
the
Farrell
Mary Farrell
Foundation.
Foundation
Thank you.
who did the most vicious editing that
Yeah.
anyone could ever imagine. If you've written books, editors, are your friend and they're not your friend because they find your mistakes. Rex, of course, is a wonderful grammar and that kind of editor. But since he knows the case so rigorously, he's editing it and edited at two levels, and so when you have somebody not just looking at the way you write, but what you write and coming back and going, Larry, you avoided the subject. And my response being, yes, Rex, I was trying to avoid that subject, but you're not going to let me, are you? Uh, yeah.
That's funny. That's like our friend Alan Dale does the same thing. He had helped edit my book as well, and he brought certain things to the forefront. So editors are important, folks. Okay, back to the book. The book is called, I'm going to hold this up and see if it comes up. I got the green screen. No, it's invisible. It's like the Invisible Man. So, I'll put a picture up as always, folks. The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. Let me read this. This is a quote from the book, and this is going to pull it together, and then we're going to take it apart, unpack it, as the common phrase goes today. Our focus in this book has been on Lee Harvey Oswald and the issues which developed around his beliefs, his activities, and his personal life. In doing so, we moved beyond Oswald himself to explore how his own goals might have brought him into the position of being framed for the attack on President Kennedy. Now, I'd like to start off and talk about Oswald's connection, if any, and the CIA. Now, let me open with this question, if you don't mind, Larry. What would have happened had Oswald lived and Jack Ruby never entered that basement that day? Do you think he had any deep, dark secrets to reveal?
That's one of the things that's interesting, Brent, because we actually ended the book with that discussion because we had finished the book. And I don't know who it was, Rex or David. Somebody asked specifically that question. It's like, okay, we've looked at what Oswald did that day. We was looked at what was anomalous, and we came up with a scenario for it. But let's assume that he had lived or that he'd been able to testify. What did he know? What could he have brought forth? I mean, if we all know who followed this subject that the evidence in the case is quite weak. Chains of possession are bad, but what they did have was a rifle that could be traced to him from the school book depository. Now, no one could put him in the building with that rifle, much less on the sixth floor, much less shooting that. But still, he's going to have to deal with that. And so he would have been in a bad position, even if he'd convinced everyone that nobody saw it. I didn't have it. Yes, it's my rifle. Okay, I have to admit that, but I don't know how it got there. Is a jury going to believe that? That's going to be challenging, even if they believe it. Like it's his rifle. So if you're not the killer, if you're not the shooter, then somebody that has your rifle and you're an accessory. So the backstop is, the worst case is he's going to be an accessory, and what's he going to offer to defend himself? Is he going to explicitly say, well, I know who got the rifle, I know who had the rifle, I know how they got it in the school book depository? Probably not, most likely, at least from the scenario that we view. He would be able to offer some names. Okay, these are people that I knew, people that I associated with. Maybe they did it. Maybe they set me up, but it's going to be speculative on his part. So one of the things after arguing through all of this with ourselves was literally that he was in a very weak position, even based on just that, just the rifle, nothing more. If that rifle had been planted or found wherever the shooting had occurred, let's say the shooting was on Main Street. Let's say, it doesn't even have to be in the school. That rifle tied to him does the job. And a jury in Texas at that point in time is probably going to be hard pressed not to convict him. Even if he's got a defense attorney that does a decent job of it, because he's not going to be able to give his defense attorney all that much information other than denials and names. And no defense attorney would be in the position to research those names. Like, okay, I'm going to investigate a conspiracy that framed you. And by the way, the trial is in 2 weeks. It's not going to happen.
That happened. Just to let you know, when Mark Lane was on the show, Mark has since passed away, folks. Mark Lane was hired by Marguerite Oswald, who was Lee Harvey's Oswald's mom, to handle, if you will, his affairs in front of the Warren Commission. He also testified in front of the Warren Commission. All that to say that context was he told me, because he's a civil rights lawyer, that he probably would have gotten him off. There just wasn't enough evidence to put him, as you said, in the sixth floor depository that day. Now, the book, folks, is called The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. Our guest tonight, Larry Hancock. I've learned, I've been in this, I got sucked down the rabbit hole like we all do in 2008. So that's quite a while I've been researching this. I have learned tons of new stuff, and you will too. So let me just quote this. The Warren Commission, and I didn't know this about the rifle, the commission's own ballistics panel disagreed with the shooting scenario. Can you explain that quote? I was shocked at this. Here they are. They've set him up to be the lone nut assassin. Guilty, 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 guilty. And the commission's own ballistics don't even believe the shooting scenario? What's going on, Larry?
It's
Eh,
fascinating. In fact, there are two elements here. I mean, the FBI investigated this crime and came up with a shooting scenario. The Warren Commission chose to reject that. So, okay, they rejected what the FBI came up with. So they did their own. But the key part of that is that we know, and Arlen Specter was the key person trying to work that out and making the angles work and that sort of thing. But still, that's all speculative, you know, because coming up with a shooting scenario and even a crime where you have a shot, where you can trace the entry point, the exit point, you can do all of that forensics work was very challenging with what we know about the autopsy and the autopsy results. But so the defense that they had, and the primary defense they would have had, because they're maintaining that one bullet, three shots, one bullet hit JFK, hit Governor Connolly. That one bullet becomes very significant to sustaining that scenario.
the
So
single bullet theory you're talking
yeah,
about.
that bullet, CE 399 is the
Yeah.
bullet in evidence. So that becomes very critical. So they convened a ballistics panel. And these people are from the Army, they're from the military, they're professionals, doctors, people that have been working with wounds and wound ballistics for decades. Okay. They convened the panel to look at that bullet to really answer the question, can this bullet have done all that? Because when you just glance at the bullet, anybody looking at the bullet for the first time, it's like, wait a minute, the bullet didn't hit anything. Supposedly
Nothing.
it went through two men, hit bone, etc., shattered Connolly's wrist. Your first thought is intuitively, it's kind of like looking at the Zapruder film. Your first shot, intuitively, at looking at Z from is he got shot from the front. That's obviously I can see that. You look at that bullet and you go, no, that doesn't work. So they gave it to this commission. The commission did a lot of ballistics tests, shooting rounds through animal bodies, that sort of thing. And in the end, this panel wrote their study
Findings.
report, basically. And they essentially, all of the people on the panel said, this doesn't work. This bullet could not have done what you want it to do. It can't have done the damage that you want it to do, and it does not support your shooting scenario. Now, the one party to sign it, one party signing that report, signed it as in a contrarian fashion, like, I disagree with this report. He carried it back to the Warren Commission, and of course, that was none other than Arlen Specter. So it's like Arlen, who has come up with the shooting scenario, kind of tucks that report away, and it's like, okay, let's not make anything of that. Okay, let's just pretend maybe we didn't even do that. Otherwise, we've got a real problem.
Arlen Specter, by the
Unfortunately,
way,
people in
folks,
the yeah,
is the guy that was responsible for the single bullet theory. So essentially, it comes in Kennedy's back, just below his neck. It's in the middle of his back. It's supposed to move upward in his body somehow, come out his throat. So it's heading in midair, right? And Governor Connolly sitting in front of him. Now it dives down. I call it the Cirque du Soleil bullet, okay? Because I'm from Montreal. And goes in Governor Connolly, breaks a rib, comes out his side, goes into his wrist, supposedly breaks his wrist, which is true. His wrist was broken, but at that particular time, he's still holding his Stetson hat and ends up in his leg. So there's 7 wounds, 2 in Kennedy, 5 in Governor Connolly. And as Larry said, this bullet is in pristine condition. It's missing several little minute grams. There are more grams found in Governor Connolly's wrist than are missing from this bullet. Explain that. Sorry, Larry. Let me read this, folks. The FBI could find, this is from the book as well. The book is called The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. And as I said, I have learned tons about Oswald and the scenario that took place that day. FBI could now find no evidence that Oswald had purchased ammunition for the Carcano rifle. This is the rifle that they say that Lee Harvey Oswald owns and did the shooting job 3 shots, they say he took. Okay, it gets better. Or even that he had ever had such ammunition in his possession. Now, wait, it gets better, folks. The only ammunition of record was the 3 expanded hulls shell casings found at the depository and 1 additional round found in a 6-round clip. In total, 4 shells from a 6-round clip. Bizarre. So here's my question. You plan to kill the president and you only come with 4 rounds out of a 6-round clip? How is this even? How do you plot something so ridiculous?
We know Oswald was intentionally cheap. He was a very frugal person, but it's hard
Boy,
to
that's
conceive that you really can't just go into a store and buy 4 bullets. You can't do that. And if you've got, like even Oswald, as cheap as he would, I just cannot believe he would not fully load the clip. Plus, of course, he also chose not to take his pistol. So I'm going to set off to kill the president with only 4 rounds of ammunition, and I'm going to throw away the rest of the ammunition because, oh, I don't need it. And I'm going to leave my pistol at home. No,
doesn't
suspension
work.
of disbelief is required here.
So again, that comes back to the predisposition that he plotted this thing in advance, and it wasn't just the spur of the moment thing. And again, there's no connection. Now, there's another integral part of this, folks, and I didn't know this till I read Larry and David's book. The Texas School Book Depository never shut down. It was open 24/7. Think about that, 24/7. Even the weekend Kennedy was killed, according to Larry's research, the depository never closed. It stayed open. So this would allow anybody wanting to plant this rifle, right? Going out on a limb here, maybe, maybe not, but anybody that would want to frame Oswald could plant the rifle easily. I mean, it's open 24/7. They could come anytime in the middle of the night. Nobody's around. Just plant the rifle and take off. How did you find that out? I mean, that's
Well,
incredible.
one of the things that people usually don't understand about the school book depository is, yes, there was a business in that building called the Texas School Book Depository, but there were also several publishing companies, book publishers, primarily dealing with textbooks, and they were on the 3rd floor, and of course they opened and closed at different times. So you couldn't just leave. When the regular shift workers left at 5 o'clock, these people did not necessarily go home. Some of them would come in at different times. Now, I can't say, we don't know. We could never find out if there was somebody who actually locked it up, like the exterior doors, overnight. Never could locate anybody that did that, but certainly it was open into the evening because Ian Griggs, a British researcher, did a lot of interviews of people in the related to the publishing company and who worked there, and asked them what their routines were. And they said, oh yeah, we would often come in after hours to do things because the individual doors were locked. The publishing company's doors were locked. So really about all you could do is, if you snuck into the building after hours, would be to steal school books, which is probably not considered a huge exposure. Okay, I'm going to go in and get a 75-pound carton of school books. Okay. But their doors were locked. It's just the difference between the building and those offices that the supervisor's doors could be locked. So again, differentiate between the building and offices inside the building. Ian did say he interviewed one fellow, though, who worked there, had not been in town on that Friday. The fellow came back, I think it was late Saturday afternoon, and he came to the building and just walked in the door, a side door. The building was unlocked. There were no police. As a crime scene, it was not off limits. He was somewhat astonished by that, but just walked over around, and we have some confirmation of that because towards the end, I think late summer of the Warren Commission inquiry, the Warren Commission started asking questions. They hadn't started with questions, but after they get a certain amount of evidence, there was some internal dialogue like, do we really know this? Can we really prove this? Whatever. And there was some controversy about the prints on the boxes. Uh, you know, can we prove that it was just Lee Harvey Oswald there? What if there was somebody else in that sniper's nest, quote unquote? So they went back to the FBI and said, we need you to print everybody in the building so we can check and see if there was somebody there that shouldn't have been there. Uh, they went back to the Texas School Book Depository, who said, no, we object to that. We don't want you printing our employees. And certainly you would have to talk to each of the publishing companies separately. And Dallas police gave up. The FBI gave up. One of the reasons they gave up is they actually talked to the crime scene guy, Day, at Dallas police, who said, quote unquote, you can find this in a report, that building was accessible all during the weekend. There were press people all over the police handling everything. There's no way you can take prints all day long, but we don't know who was there. So what good would it do you?
Oh, what a book. I was going to say what a shit show, but it is a shit show. Absolute mess. The murder of the president, you think things would be copacetic and they would lock it down and everything else. Now, you had alluded to somebody else being in the Texas School Book Depository, sixth floor. And this is something that I've always questioned. Um, there was a fellow by the name of Bonnie, it was either his first or last name, eating fried chicken
Oh, yes, yes.
few minutes before the murder took place. And he was sitting on as a matter of fact, they found the bones from his fried chicken. And that's how they knew that he had been there just prior to the shooting, just a few minutes. My question has always been if that was the perch, if that was the place where this assassination was going to emanate from, what if he had stayed a few minutes longer and watched the president from there? What's your speculation on that?
Well, of course, there were three of the workers who worked there, African
Hmm.
Americans,
Hmm.
who actually were doing repair work on the floors mostly, but they had all agreed that they would meet to watch the motorcade from the upper floor, like from the fifth floor, because the sixth floor was dustier and so on. So, and one of them, I think he had gone out to get some fried chicken. He didn't have his lunch with him, so the other two ate in the lunchroom down on the second floor, and they actually, in testimony at one point, essentially admitted that they had seen Lee Harvey Oswald at lunchtime downstairs, which nobody in the official invest. Oswald had said, "Oh, I went by the lunchroom and I saw the two guys sitting there." They said, "Oh, we thought this guy," but nobody wanted to hear that. But what he said later is that he had gone up by mistake to the sixth floor, not realizing that they were on the fifth floor, so he had to go down and join them on the fifth floor. So your question is good, but what we don't know is because they actually changed their stories from the
I
first
see.
day story to their story definitely lined up with the official story more by like next week than it did that day. But by that within a few days they're talking about hearing rifle shells hitting the floor. Okay, now this is a wood floor like this, and they're going, "Oh yeah, I know Oswald is up there because I heard the shells hit the floor." No, no, don't think so. And one of them said, "Oh, I stuck my head out the window and all this dust and these fragments fell on my case." What? So the problem with their story is clearly they were concerned about aligning their story with the official story for many reasons that you can imagine. We
Absolutely.
really don't know what they saw or what they might have seen. We don't know that he didn't see what you're speculating
Yeah.
about. He never talked. He never talked after the fact. Local researchers talked to them both, to all three of them, and basically were given the impression that it would be too dangerous for them to talk about what they'd actually seen, which might have been someone exiting that floor, coming down the stairway. Who knows? But
Yeah.
there's certainly reason to speculate that we never really got the full story with what was going on the fifth and sixth floor.
Now, the other thing that's important to mention too, and this goes back to the Warren Commission, is they could never establish a motive to kill the president from Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald, as it says in the book, The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald, loved the president. Every time he would be questioned about President Kennedy, he had nothing but good things to say. Can we talk about the lack of motive? And nonetheless, they still came up with this scenario.
Yeah, that's one, quite frankly, that's one of the reasons we wrote the book,
Hmm.
because the picture that the Warren Commission was forced to present due to lack of motive, if they can't provide a motive, they can't provide any witnesses that have him talking against the president. Everybody they talk to, Oswald is very much for racial justice,
Mhm.
economic justice. Even when he was on radio in New Orleans, and the host tried to like get him to personally say something negative against President Kennedy, he refused to do so and simply said he was opposed to American policies towards Cuba over for the last several years, which would include Eisenhower as well. So he wouldn't even go that far. So the Warren Commission was kind of really faced a problem. So they had to abandon the usual motive uh, and go to a psychological pro. We have to make Oswald look like the kind of person that could do this. So they set him up as being asocial, antisocial, violent, a radical, basically revolutionary type. And uh, and unfortunately, in a
And a
pushback
communist.
against that, most of the conspiracy community, including me, has tended to be very defensive about Lee Harvey Oswald. Like if the Warren Commission is going to make him one-sided, and we don't think he did it, let's give him a break and swing the other way. We're not going to look at any negatives about him. Really, we want him to be pretty much blameless, vanilla, at best maybe a tool following orders. But that doesn't bring motive into it either, really. It's kind of
No,
like
I
he's
agree.
he's just a robot somehow, and he
Yeah.
was taking orders without even thinking what was going on. So he's not very bright, and he's very compliant. And so both parties, both groups, and I have to say for myself, have tended to look at him from these two places, which is why David and I went, no, no, let's start from scratch. Not where is he? Obviously, he's somewhere in the middle. Any real person would be somewhere in the middle.
You're absolutely right. We've always tended to look at Oswald as black and white. Um, Either he did the shooting as a lone nut assassin, or he was unwitting accomplice, if you will, and maybe not even part of it. He was just being used. But there's far more to Lee Harvey Oswald than I was led to believe. This guy's an intelligent guy. He's only 22 years old, turned 23 in the October, and he speaks Russian. He's been over to Russia. As you said, he is very, if you will, progressive in his thoughts. He certainly is for the working man. He's certainly for equality, and yet he loves President Kennedy. So to come out and say he had a motive or anything, it's completely false. So just to wrap it up, there was no motive, and yet the Warren Commission had this perfectly wrapped guy given to them. And that's where I want to go in the next show. I want to talk about the anti Castro Cubans and the DRE. But for now, Larry, is it okay we wrap it up? And
Sure.
stick around, of course, and folks, I'm breaking it up to half-hour shows. So, primarily because the show is put on in the university situation, university NCRA, it's called National Campus Radio Association, and they need the shows to be a half an hour long and no longer. So I'm Brent Holland from the Brent Holland Show. Thank you all for joining us. Don't go anywhere. There's going to be a new show in a few minutes. Take care of everybody out there. Rough times right now, both sides of the border. See you next time.